My narcissistic sister has been physically abusive towards my daughter and me, forcing us to leave our parents' home. My parents are now facing eviction and have appealed to me for assistance. However, they continue to refuse to hold my sister accountable for her actions. I am a 33-year-old single mother of a 5-year-old daughter. I separated from my husband after the birth of our daughter because he had been unfaithful to me during my pregnancy. This incident is a separate matter that I will discuss in a subsequent post. I terminated the relationship and I relocated to my parents' residence 2 days ago. Upon returning from work, I discovered my younger sister, Eva, 29, seated with her heavily pregnant abdomen. She had relocated to Croatia with her husband following their marriage. I was gratified to see her, as she had been unkind to me throughout our childhood. There was no discernible reason for her animosity, but she considered herself superior to me. She would manipulate our parents against me, exploiting her status as the younger sibling. Despite her younger age and physical advantages, I was unable to escape her dominance. If she had grabbed my wrist, I would have been unable to free myself. Those who observed us could discern that I was incapable of physically confronting her. My parents did not believe me when I complained that she had beaten me. They would say that she is your younger sister, and it is implausible that she could have beaten you. Consequently, I maintained a distance from her. I even avoided I was forced to interact with her unless it was absolutely necessary. Fortunately, I was able to move out for high school, which was a significant relief. Now that she has returned to my life, seeing her pregnant, I initially believed she was only staying for her postpartum period. I inquired with my mother about her expected length of stay. Eva overheard me and loudly proclaimed from the living room that she was going to stay. I asked her if she had a problem with that, and she replied, "Do you have a problem with that?" It was clear that she had not changed at all. She remained as narcissistic as ever. My mother informed me that Eva's husband has been transferred back to the United States. He has secured accommodation from the company, but since Eva is pregnant, they believe that living with our parents is the most suitable arrangement for her. They can provide care during pregnancy and after childbirth. I inquired with my mother if she had the capacity to care for her child. She replied that she did, but that Eva is still young and may require assistance in raising her child. I was perplexed. Eva is 29 years old and cannot raise her child on her own. I was 27 when I delivered a baby. I handled my postpartum alone because my husband was busy. My mother also did not come to help me. She told me that I should learn to raise a child, which is a part of motherhood. Now, when her golden child is pregnant, she is ready to become a nanny for her. She is a hypocrite. Their favoritism has always been evident. That is the reason I have always kept my distance from them. I maintained a distance from my husband when we separated. I rented a house and did not move in with my parents. My father insisted that I live with them, stating that their house was too large for 2 people. He also claimed that they would be present to supervise my daughter when I was away at work. Instead of paying rent for a separate house, I could live with them and pay rent to them. This seemed like a fair arrangement to me, particularly given the circumstances. Moreover, I was going through a difficult period. I was experiencing a great deal of emotional turmoil at the time, which made it challenging for me to think clearly. I was dealing with the aftermath of a pregnancy, the challenges of postpartum life, the difficulties of my husband's infidelity, and the stress of a divorce. When my father offered me support, I was eager to accept it. I moved in with them, but I faced no significant problems living with them. However, the support that he promised to provide for my daughter was not consistently upheld. Mom agreed to babysit my daughter only a few times, and when she did, she often had to cancel at the last minute. Given the circumstances, it would be prudent to engage the services of a nanny. If the nanny is performing her duties satisfactorily, she can serve as a baby monitor. I considered it preferable to have my mother around than to leave my daughter in the care of a stranger. Consequently, I opted for a full-time nanny. Furthermore, the nanny is a source of concern. It is disheartening to observe how my sister's mother is attempting to provide her with food, medications, and supplements. This is a stark contrast to my own experience during my 9 months of pregnancy. During that period, she barely visited me 2 or 3 times, and only once after my delivery. Since I have learned that Eva is going to remain in our household, I have experienced a profound sense of unease. I have the distinct impression that they are up to no good. How could they possibly agree to let Eva move in permanently? We don't have that big a house to let them in. I'm happy to move out, but my daughter is too young to be left alone without any supervision. My mother doesn't babysit her exclusively yet, but it feels safe to have her around. If I move out, it would be necessary to have a babysitter at home, which I consider to be an unwise decision. I am aware that I am a clingy mother, but I am also a single mother, and I consider my daughter to be the only hope of my life. I am aware that I tend to be overprotective of her, but I am unsure of how to proceed. She is my lifeline, and I am grateful for all the advice that I have received. The response to my post helped me to calm down my nerves. 2 days later, I returned home to find my belongings packed and placed on the front porch, with my daughter seated nearby. I inquired as to who had done this, and she informed me that and had packed everything and made her sit there. My daughter is a quiet and well-mannered child. The child, who is of a reserved and well-mannered disposition, had been waiting for me for hours. I inquired as to the whereabouts of her grandparents, to which she did not respond. Instead, she embraced me and stated that she had been awaiting my return because she was deeply distressed by the actions of her aunt, Eva. I inquired as to whether Eva had harmed her or scolded her, to which she responded with sobs. My daughter informed me that Aunt Eva was yelling at her, though she did not understand the words. Furthermore, she stated that Aunt Eva was throwing all of my belongings around, which made her feel threatened. I then proceeded to enter my room and demand an explanation from Eva. She responded by stating that I was messing with a pregnant woman, and that she could call the police on me for harassing her. She also threatened to report me to the authorities for trespassing. I informed her that I could also contact the authorities if she continued to harass my daughter while I was absent. She responded with laughter and asked if I had any evidence that my mother was present when I packed her belongings. I was uncertain as to whose side my mother would ultimately take in this situation. I attempted to intervene, but she ignored me. Despite my mother's absence, I received no response. She was home but had locked her room. Eva's evil laugh made it clear that they were all ganging up against me. Eva smirked at my helplessness and said, "Take a hint, you dumbass. No one wants you here. We packed for you and made it easier for you. Can't you see I'm pregnant and I require a period of solitude? My child and I will be residing here henceforth. I implore you to cease your indolence and relocate your belongings from $. I am not inclined to remain in this residence without compensation. I have already fulfilled my financial obligation." She advanced towards me in a manner reminiscent of her childhood. "Do you possess documentation substantiating your rental agreement?" "No, that is correct." "How long do you intend to remain dependent on my parents' financial support?" "You are a disgrace. Your husband found solace in another woman's arms because you are a burden. Leave immediately if you do not wish to be physically assaulted in front of your daughter." My daughter rushed towards me and embraced me. She was terrified by the commotion. Given the chaotic circumstances, I proceeded to load my vehicle with my personal belongings and departed, accompanied by my daughter. It became evident that there were no further avenues for discussion. My parents demonstrated a lack of resolve in the face of her assertions. She was not untruthful when she stated that her mother was present during the incident. In fact, her mother played an active role in the packing process. Given her advanced stage of pregnancy, it is implausible that she could have managed the task independently. It is evident that she would have been able to lift or drag my wardrobe and heavy suitcases without their assistance. They are all complicit in this situation. Her husband has a decent job and they can easily afford to have their separate house. Nevertheless, she came behind me and chased me out. She is adamant about making my life miserable. She allowed her husband to participate in this. She resides at her employer's residence while she is in my home, causing me distress. I am uncertain as to what I have done to deserve such treatment. Even my parents do not speak out against her. I checked into a hotel for a week and searched for a place to live, but it was challenging to manage work and house hunting. It is exceedingly challenging to find a suitable residence within a week's time. One of my colleagues was seeking a roommate, and I requested to be considered as a potential candidate. I assured her that my daughter would not be a disturbance and that I would vacate the premises as soon as I found a suitable alternative. She was kind enough to allow me to enter the premises. I have been residing with her for approximately 2 weeks. I have identified a suitable property within my financial means and within the vicinity of my place of work and my daughter's childcare facility. However, the current tenant is not expected to vacate the premises for another month. I have already made the necessary bookings, but I am awaiting the tenant's departure. It has been approximately 3 weeks since I have moved out. My daughter was evicted from our residence, and she continues to exhibit signs of distress, including trembling and fear of her aunt, Eva. While she is unable to describe the specific actions of Eva, she reports that Eva yelled at her and stared at her with wide eyes, threatening to hit her if she cried. The child continues to sob and wet her bed, fearful of Eva. I am unsure of how I can help her forget the incident. I feel helpless to see her saddened by the memory of that day. I still cannot comprehend how unsafe my daughter would have felt that day, having been traumatized in my absence. She is a mother, yet she has no empathy for a child is difficult to achieve, particularly when one is unable to forgive. If the opportunity arises to take revenge, it is important to consider the consequences. In this case, I was seeking an opportunity to take revenge on my daughter, and I found one. I was paying the rent for living at my parents' house over the last year. My father asked me to pay an additional $5,000. I agreed to help him out, despite being unaware that he was using my rent money to pay the mortgage. Upon my departure, I did not pay the additional $5,000 in rent. On the 10th of this month, my father called me in a state of distress, inquiring about the non-transfer of funds. The funds I received this month were subject to an automated withdrawal, which was unsuccessful due to an insufficient balance. This prompted a response from the bank indicating that the transaction had been declined. It is evident that the individual in question was confident that I would fulfill my financial obligations, despite my relocation. He did not verify his account balance or maintain emergency funds, despite being aware of my departure. Upon receiving this information, I politely informed him that I no longer reside at his residence. I also reminded him of my previous status as his golden child, which led to my eviction. Consequently, I questioned why he expected me to fulfill my financial obligations. I pay the rent. He remained silent for a moment, and then said, "How are you going to pay the mortgage?" "I don't make enough money now, as the sales at my store have dwindled. Whatever little I make, I use to run the house and for errands. I was using the rent money and that extra $5,000 to pay the mortgage." I said, "That's not my problem. I don't owe you anything. I paid for my stay, and I'm not going to pay for yours. I purchased my own food. I suggested that your narcissistic daughter assist you in this matter. I am confident that she would be willing to do so." I terminated the call within an hour. My mother called to inform me that your father is experiencing financial difficulties and that, instead of providing him with assistance, I was refusing to speak with him. "Did you forget how we supported you when your former husband abandoned you? This is how you repay us. You must swallow your shallow pride." Furthermore, I requested that she transfer the funds she had been sending me on a monthly basis. In response, she asserted that I was being unreasonable. She informed me that she had allowed me to live in her house because I had been paying rent, yet she had used the money for a mortgage. She had also hired a babysitter whenever she needed assistance. She had not contributed to my support in any meaningful way. I informed her that I was no longer willing to accept such treatment, as I had done in the past as a child. I am now aware of how to reciprocate. She became more amenable, suggesting that Eva was pregnant and needed more space. This was the reason for her request that I temporarily move out. There is no reason to take offense at this. She did not request me, and she threw me out while you all chose to remain silent. She subjected my daughter to abuse, and I will never forgive you all for that. She attempted to justify her daughter's behavior by claiming that the latter was immature and entitled. She advised that I should not take her words personally, and that I should be the bigger person and forgive her. She further suggested that I should send her the money. I informed her that her actions were motivated by financial gain. I stated that I was no longer willing to be treated as a doormat by her and her allies. I also expressed my belief that she had favored her over me throughout our relationship. My daughter has reached a point where I believe she has crossed all limits of sanity. I never wanted to stay with you all, but I stayed because I feared leaving my daughter alone with a nanny. However, now my daughter feels threatened more by you guys than a stranger. She started sobbing and apologizing. I cut her off and said I'm done getting manipulated by crocodile tears. I'm not going to give a penny. Subsequently, they ceased contacting me. There has been no further communication for approximately 1 month. I believe that they are either managing the mortgage independently or that their daughter is assisting them in this endeavor. I am indifferent to their personal affairs. I am content in my modest domicile with my daughter. I have employed a nanny to care for her after her daycare hours. The nanny is a middle-aged woman with a son who is 5 years her junior. The nanny and my daughter enjoy spending time together, and it is a source of great joy for me to return home to a happy and loving daughter. Life does improve with time, and we must persevere. The woman in question is an elderly woman who has a son 5 years her junior. She brings her son to play with my daughter, and they enjoy each other's company. It is a source of great joy to return home to a daughter who is happy and loving. Life does improve with time and effort. I would like to thank everyone for their kind words and support. I am sorry for not updating this thread. 2 reasons for this include the lack of a relevant update to post and the termination of all ties with parents and a narcissistic sister. The second reason is that I was too busy with life in general. I was promoted this year, which is a positive development. However, it comes with extra responsibility, as well as extra pay. Consequently, I have been caught up with work and motherly duties. However, I did receive an interesting update this time last week. My mother and father showed up at my workplace. They did not. I am aware of their whereabouts and they showed up at my workplace. I informed the security to ask them to leave because I was too busy to meet anyone. From the window blinds, I could see that they were engaged in an argument with the security and were not ready to leave. They appeared to be somewhat fragile, and it seemed that they had aged by at least 10 years. Mom was carrying an infant in her arms. I guessed it was Eva's child. This prompted my curiosity, and I proceeded to meet with them. Upon seeing me, they began to sob. They approached me as their last hope to save the house. My father informed me that he had been unable to pay the mortgage on the house for the past 7 to 8 months. He had used whatever savings he had to pay for the initial 2 to 3 months after I left. The bank had given them sufficient time to pay the money, but they had continued to default on their payments. Last month, the bank evicted them from the house and put it up for sale. They had been living in a small, dingy apartment since then. They approached me to request assistance in saving their house. I listened to them patiently and asked them why their entitled daughter did not help them. They lowered their faces and told me that their husband had kicked them out of the house because he had found her cheating on him. Even the baby was present during this conversation. The family was evicted from their residence and the property was subsequently placed on the market. They have been residing in a substandard apartment since that time. They sought assistance from me in an effort to save their home. I listened to them attentively and inquired as to why their entitled daughter did not assist them. They lowered their gaze and stated that her husband had kicked her out of the house because he had discovered her infidelity. Even the infant was present during the incident. It became evident that the transfer stories and the company's accommodation were false. Her husband is still in Croatia, and their divorce is imminent. I was taken aback by this information. I inquired whether, even after learning of this, they continued to support her. Her mother responded that they were unaware of this information. She stated that she was present for the delivery, but that after they moved out and requested her assistance with the mortgage, she was not informed. The truth was revealed, and I was taken aback. I embraced her and wept. It was evident that she had been supported by the other party, and that is why she was holding their child. They expressed their dismay at the situation, stating that they had no choice but to leave her in that condition, as they had no other means of support. Their circumstances appeared dire, and I remained silent, contemplating the best course of action. I considered various possibilities. I inquired as to the whereabouts of Eva at work. My mother was murmuring something, but my father gave her a look and stated that she was at home. He informed me that she had refused to go to work. My mother then interjected, stating that it was implausible that she would leave such a young infant and go to work. I laughed and said, "Really, Mom? You're still supporting her? Her infant must be between 7 and 8 months old." I then proceeded to cite examples of women around the world who have returned to work after the birth of their child, leaving their 6-month-old infants with family members or in childcare facilities. 1 month. The same can be said of Eva, who has an infant at home. Given her circumstances, it would have been prudent for her to seek employment at an earlier juncture. They further implored me for assistance, and I informed them that I did not possess the financial resources to save their house. My father suggested that if I were able to pay the defaulted months, he could request that the manager halt the sale of the house. I informed them that I did not possess the requisite funds. I had already expended my savings to secure the lease for my residence and to facilitate the admission of my daughter to elementary school. My mother's reaction was one of disapproval. I urged her to recognize that I am a single mother who is solely responsible for the care and support of my child. I was left to care for my daughter on my own following their departure. I experienced a profound sense of despair. My manager inquired about my well-being, noting my prolonged absence from my desk. I consulted with her and she proposed a solution. I contacted my father and informed him that I was prepared to assume responsibility for the accumulated mortgage payments and any subsequent ones. However, he was required to transfer the ownership of the property. My manager proposed that I purchase the house with my promotion and raise. Given my long-term assistance with the mortgage and current role in helping them save the house, it would be reasonable for them to provide financial assistance in return. I would allow them to live in the house, but without their loan. My father remained silent and said he would discuss that with my mother and let me know. I said, "Take your time. I am uncertain as to whether you have sufficient resources." It has been a week since then, but they have not contacted me. They have not provided an answer regarding my proposal. They are amenable to the sale of their property and to residing in the apartment is shady, but they have not relinquished their parental authority and are content to live comfortably. They have made their choices and must now live with the consequences. On my return from work, I considered driving by my parents' house to see if the sale board was up, but then dismissed the idea. I have decided to sever all ties with them. A year ago, I made the decision to sever all ties with my former in-laws. I am content with my current situation, living with my daughter and witnessing her growth and achievements. She is currently in elementary school, and I am immensely proud of her. On to the next story. My wife was caught having an affair with our friend during a couple's beach trip. Due to the terms of our prenuptial agreement, I was able to leave my wife with nothing. We had recently relocated to a new neighborhood and did not yet have any acquaintances there. Fortunately, through our children, we were able to meet some interesting couples with whom we could socialize. One such couple, whom we will refer to as Larry and Pam, was particularly welcoming. The four of us shared numerous interests and pursued a lifestyle of frequent travel, despite having children. Prior to meeting them, my wife and I considered such a lifestyle to be unattainable. However, we quickly formed a close bond with Larry and Pam, and spent a significant amount of time together. Our children were also close, which facilitated our relationship. When we desired to socialize, we found it convenient to travel together. We engaged in double dates and traveled together. We also discussed matters pertaining to our children. After a few months of knowing them, I began to observe that Larry exhibited a somewhat flirtatious demeanor. I joked about it one time when he was flirting with my wife. I advised him to refrain from such behavior because she was already taken. He shrugged his shoulders in response. He assured me that he was merely a flirt and that his actions were not intended to be taken seriously. I was confident in my relationship and not overly concerned about the occasional flirtation. I had always believed that such behavior was harmless as long as it did not evolve into something more serious. However, the flirting continued with such frequency that I began to feel uneasy. I began to feel uneasy about the situation. My wife was a beautiful woman, and while I did not want to imply that Pam was not attractive, it was clear that Larry was not the only one interested in her. I was unsure if he was respecting our boundaries. Pam and Larry sent their children to a summer camp every year, and they were able to convince my wife and I to send our children to the same camp. The rationale behind this was that if the children were away for 2 weeks, we could take a grown. We had considered taking a vacation without our children, which we felt would be beneficial for our relationship. My wife and I were looking forward to this opportunity to spend time together without the distraction of our children. We believed that this would be a chance for us to reconnect and enjoy some quality time together. However, my wife had been becoming increasingly distant, which I attributed to her concern about missing our children while we were away. From them, we had spent more than we had ever spent apart. I was aware that it would be challenging for her, but I observed that she was making secret phone calls and texting people in a very private manner. I was curious about what was occurring. On the day of our departure, we joined Pam and Larry at AV Vacation Rental. We all departed together. The accommodation was situated right on the beach. It included a jacuzzi tub on the porch, a large smoker grill, and we departed from our luxurious accommodations and arrived at the destination, which was a vacation rental on the beach. We purchased beer and wine and proceeded to consume them outside, after which we engaged in conversation with a man who was grilling. We consumed more alcohol and became somewhat intoxicated. My wife and Larry were observed engaging in flirtatious behavior. I was in a high state of spirits and did not take their actions seriously. I retired to bed, and upon waking the next morning, my wife was not present. Upon arising and traversing the domicile, I observed my spouse in the vicinity of the water, attired in a bathing suit and engaged in swimming. This would have been an acceptable occurrence had Larry not been present, clad in a swimming trunks and positioned in close proximity to her. He appeared to be appraising her physique in her bathing suit, and my spouse made no effort to divert his gaze. I proceeded to join them. They both welcomed me as if nothing untoward was occurring, which somewhat alleviated my concerns. However, I still found Larry's ogling of my wife to be a source of discomfort. Consequently, I proceeded to escort him back to the house later that night. That evening, we all went dancing once more. We consumed alcohol and became increasingly inebriated on the dance floor. At this juncture, I observed that Larry was consistently gravitating towards my wife. I was compelled to move away from them. Despite my wife's apparent enjoyment of Larry's company, I found his constant proximity to her to be a source of discomfort. What exacerbated my frustration was her apparent willingness to allow this behavior. He would frequently approach her and place his hands on her waist, and she would lean into him. I was left wondering whether she was unaware of my feelings or whether she was so intoxicated that she was unable to discern right from wrong. I decided to wait until the following morning to inquire about this behavior. She dismissed my concerns with a laugh and reassured me that I had nothing to worry about. It seems that she had no recollection of dancing with Larry on the third and final day of our vacation. However, the situation soon escalated. We had planned to stay at the vacation rental for 6 days, but I was compelled to leave early due to witnessing Larry with my wife. Despite this, the day had been relatively uneventful, with the exception of my observation. I observed Larry looking at my wife and her bikini, and I was reassured by my wife's account. However, I soon realized that my initial assessment was correct. We were preparing to grill some food, and I was outside doing so while Pam assisted me by preparing chicken and vegetables. I was unaware that my wife and Larry were absent. I proceeded to the refrigerator to retrieve additional meat, and upon hearing what I believed to be shuffling in the laundry room, I paused and listened. I discerned the sounds of 2 individuals attempting to maintain composure while engaging in sexual intercourse. I promptly opened the door and observed my wife positioned against the wall with Larry in front. My wife and Larry were in the midst of sexual intercourse. They were so absorbed in the act that they failed to notice my entrance. Pam entered the room shortly after I opened the door and observed them as well. She screamed at Larry, who jumped backward, causing my wife to fall to the ground. Both of them looked at us with a sense of shock and disbelief. They were taken aback by our discovery. I simply walked away and proceeded to pack my belongings in preparation for departure. My wife pursued me to the room, attempting to persuade me not to leave and to forgive her. She asserted that he meant nothing and that he had merely been present at the opportune moment. I had no response to that, as the laundry room was the appropriate venue for such discussions. However, I was no longer interested in engaging in such discourse, and I informed her to leave. I proceeded to enter the bedroom and observed that her mobile phone was on the nightstand, charging. I proceeded to examine it to ascertain the duration of its usage. It appeared to have been in use for several weeks, based on the evidence I could discern. It seemed that she and Larry had been exchanging messages about their excitement at going to the beach house. Larry informed my wife that he was more excited to see her in a bathing suit than anything else. My wife initially expressed displeasure at the prospect of her in a bathing suit, but eventually acquiesced to his advances. She eventually confessed to him that she found him attractive and was willing to engage in a clandestine relationship. They met once before we all went to the beach house, where they had sex in our kitchen. I informed Pam of the situation and she corroborated my account. I learned of the affair through my wife's phone. She was just as hurt as I was. We both left the beach house together and went back home. On the entire drive back, we discussed our anger and desire to ruin their lives. They did not get to cheat on us and simply be happy. After I got married, my mother encouraged me to get a prenuptial agreement. While I was not the wealthiest person in the world, I had received an inheritance prior to my marriage and had accumulated a comfortable nest egg. Additionally, I had a stable job that offered competitive compensation and benefits. These factors collectively provided a sufficient level of financial security for my wife to avoid working. Our prenuptial agreement explicitly stated that, in the event of a divorce, she would receive a percentage of my assets, with the exception of those assets specifically designated as marital property. In the event of a divorce due to infidelity or marital betrayal, I could leave her without fear of losing a penny. This was the most effective way to inflict pain. She did not return home until the following day, which led me to question whether she was merely taking advantage of the time she had with Larry. I informed her of our impending divorce and my intention to evict her from the house. She vehemently denied that I could do so and asserted her rights in the divorce. She claimed that she was entitled to half of everything. This seemed like a calculated attempt to gain as much as possible. I questioned whether she had ever loved me in the first place. I reminded her of our prenuptial agreement. I observed her reaction. I informed her of my intention to divorce her and of my desire for her to leave the marital residence. She vehemently denied that I could do so, asserting her rights and claiming that, in the event of our divorce, she was entitled to half of our assets. It seemed as though she had always intended to pursue this course of action. I questioned whether she had ever truly loved me. I reminded her of our prenuptial agreement and observed her reaction. The indignation in her eyes dissipated as she came to realize that she was going to be completely screwed. Pam and I both ended up divorcing our spouses. I did not have to pay alimony to my wife, and I ended up selling the house. Now, I am just trying to pick up the pieces that were left behind in all the mess. I know that there are still some good people out there, but I just have to find them.